Proverbs, Unlocking the Bible by David Pawson. Introduction. Proverbs seems at first to be a strange book to be included in the Bible. It contains humorous observations and pithy sayings that seem to be little more than common sense. The book doesn't seem very spiritual. It says little about private or public devotions, and some of its themes seem distinctly mundane. Some of the Proverbs make points which are obvious to everyone. For example, poverty is the ruin of the poor. A happy heart makes the face cheerful. Better to live on a corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. Like one who seizes a dog by the ears is a passer-by who meddles in a quarrel not his own. Some of the Proverbs seem more entertaining than edifying, and others seem downright immoral. For example, a bribe does wonders. It will bring you before men of importance. Many of the Proverbs have found their way into everyday speech. Number 1. For Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, I am deeply indebted to the superb commentaries of Derek Kidner in the Tyndale series published by IVP. Readers wanting to study these books in greater detail are warmly commended to obtain these models of their kind. Spare the rod and spoil the child. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. Pride goes before a fall. Stolen food is sweet. Iron sharpens iron. The book of Proverbs describes life as it really is, not life in church, but life in the street, the office, the shop, the home. The book covers all aspects of life, not just what you do on Sundays in church. It considers how you should live throughout the week in every situation. So the characters who are found in the book of Proverbs can be easily recognized in all cultures. There is the woman who talks too much, the wife who is always nagging, the aimless youth hanging around on street corners, the neighbour who is always dropping in and staying too long, the friend who is unbearably cheerful first thing in the morning. Indeed, the 900 Proverbs cover most of life's important subjects, often presenting them as contrasts: wisdom and folly, pride and humility, love and lust, wealth and poverty, work and leisure, masters and servants, husbands and wives, friends and relatives, life and death. But there are significant and surprising omissions. There is very little which is religious, no mention of priests and prophets, and very little about kings, all people who figure prominently in the rest of the Old Testament. It is important that from the outset we are clear about the way in which we should view the subjects that are covered. Some people would make the mistake of claiming that Proverbs focuses upon secular life, but the so-called secular-sacred divide is not one that the Bible endorses. Indeed, as far as God is concerned, the only thing that can be described as secular is sin itself. The idea that only the religious is sacred comes from the Greek philosophers, and has filtrated into much modern thinking, even among Christians. The Bible knows of no such division. Any activity can be sacred if it can be devoted to God. He would rather have a good taxi driver than a bad missionary. All legitimate jobs are at the same level. So Proverbs is interested in where most of our waking life is lived. This book tells us how we can make the most of life and warns us that many people waste it. It is about the good life. Its wisdom enables us to arrive at the end of our days pleased with all that we have accomplished. How is Proverbs related to the message of the rest of the Bible? The Apostle Paul, in his second letter to Timothy, said that the Holy Scriptures are able to make him wise for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. But a reading of Proverbs may leave us wondering where salvation appears, since the themes of redemption that are common in other biblical books are strangely absent. But the theme is there. The word salvation is very close in meaning to words such as salvage or recycling. God is in the business of recycling people so that they become useful. Christians are changed from sinners into saints, but also from being foolish to being wise. The message of the Bible is that the real cause of pollution on the planet is people. Jesus himself likened hell to the rubbish dump in the valley of Gehenna outside Jerusalem, where all the garbage was thrown. He spoke of people being thrown into hell as if they were good for nothing. God recycles people who are heading for hell, turning fools into wise people. So in that sense, Proverbs is full of salvation, since it tells us the sort of life we are saved for, and reminds us about the sort of life we have been saved from. It thus corrects an imbalance that is common in the preaching of many churches. Too much attention is paid to what we are saved from, and not enough to what we are saved to and for. What about wisdom outside the Bible? Many would argue there is a lot of wisdom that is not included in the Bible. What about the wisdom of Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and Confucius? It need not surprise us that there is wisdom outside the Bible, for all men and women are made in the image of God, and so they are able to make sense of life. But this is not to say that they have enough sense to make the most of life. Only when Christ redeems us do we grasp the real meaning of life and live as God intends. So in this respect the world's wisdom will always be folly, for it lacks eternal perspective. So Proverbs is affirming the truth that God is the all-wise God, the source of all wisdom, and that it is his wisdom that created the whole universe with all its complexity. Why was Proverbs written? Proverbs is unusual among the books of the Bible in that it tells us why it was written. The prologue says that learning from Proverbs will lead us to wisdom, and it tells us that the very step in becoming wise is to fear God, that is Yahweh, the God of the Jews. If we come to understand that he hates evil, and that as the all-seeing judge nothing escapes his attention, then we will see our folly and our need for help in order to live life as he desires. Wisdom comes from fearing him, asking him for wisdom and learning how to handle the affairs of this world in a shrewd and sound way. The book also tells us that wisdom comes from God via other people. God has chosen to pass on his wisdom, especially through parents, grandparents, and other people who are more experienced than us. So Proverbs contains many references to the family relationships that form the context in which wisdom is shared. The author. The man who is most associated with wisdom in the Bible is the man who wrote the book of Proverbs, King Solomon. On his ascension to the throne, God offered him anything he asked for, and he asked for wisdom to govern others. God gave him wisdom along with other things that he didn't ask for, such as fame, power, and wealth. His wise words were legendary, although he seemed to have more wisdom for others than for himself. After all, collecting 700 wives and presumably 700 mother-in-law was hardly wise, not to mention 300 concubines. But there was an important condition attached to God's promise of wisdom. He told Solomon in 1 Kings, "I will give you a wise and discerning heart, if you walk in my ways and obey my statutes and commands." So we must conclude that the evident folly of his latter years was the result of neglecting these conditions. In his prime, Solomon became so famous for his wisdom that the Queen of Sheba made a long journey not just to see his wealth but to hear his wisdom. Modern philosophers look back to the wise men of Greece such as Plato, Socrates and Aristotle, who lived around 400 years before Christ, but they forget that back in the Bronze Age, about 1,000 years before Christ, there was a wise man who was just as famous. Solomon wrote many of the Proverbs in the book of Proverbs, and he collected many others. He also wrote the Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes. He wrote the Song of Songs when he was a young man, so much in love that he forgot about God altogether. It is a book of the heart. He wrote Proverbs when he was middle-aged. It is a book of the will. His last book, Ecclesiastes, was written in old age. It's a book of the mind, as he meditates on his life and wonders whether he has achieved anything with it. So we have Solomon as a young lover, a middle-aged father, and an elderly philosopher, writing these 3 books of wisdom. One of the most intriguing things about the book of Proverbs is that some of the proverbs in it come from outside Israel. There are some proverbs from Arabic philosophers and a whole chapter from Egypt, probably collected through one of his wives who was the daughter of Pharaoh. Solomon recognized that God had given wisdom to people outside the land of Israel, so he was happy to include it in his work. These sayings were brought into the framework of a life lived under God. But that is not to say that the book of Proverbs does not have a strong reverence for God. God is mentioned 90 times in the book as Yahweh, the God of Israel, not some God that other nations might believe in. There is certainly no suggestion that the Arabic or Egyptian gods have any value. Part of the collection was completed by King Hezekiah, who collected many of Solomon's unwritten proverbs, some 250 years later, and these too are included in the book. So Proverbs as we have it today was not completed until about 550 BC. The book's style. Before examining the content of the book, we need to consider some background points about its style and intention. Proverbs, not promises. First, it is crucial to realize that this is a book of Proverbs, not a book of promises. We should never quote a proverb as if it is a divine promise. The English word proverb comes from the Latin proverba. Pro means for and verba means word. The two combined mean a word for a situation. A proverb is an appropriate word that fits the situation. It is thus a timeless truth that can be used in different situations in life. The Hebrew word that we translate as proverb is mashgal, which means to resemble or to be like something. Jesus began a number of parables with the phrase, "The kingdom of heaven is like this." So a proverb is a general observation on life, whereas a promise is a particular obligation. Let me illustrate. Here is a proverb. Pawson has a passion for punctuality. How is that proverb applied? It means that Pawson likes to be on time, but that is not the same as saying that Pawson makes a promise to be at a certain place by a certain time. I am not morally to blame if the proverb breaks down, but I am to blame if a promise breaks down. So a proverb is only generally true. We shouldn't apply a proverb to every situation and expect it to work. We must not assume that God is making promises to us when we read Proverbs. Thinking that a proverb is a promise has caused problems to many people. For example, honesty is the best policy. This is generally true, but not always true. I know people who have lost a fortune through being honest. Furthermore, proverbs can contradict each other. For example, more haste, less speed, and he who hesitates is lost. Turning to the book of Proverbs, we find the same features. In chapter 26 we read, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly." But the very next verse says, "Answer a fool according to his folly." Two proverbs that have frequently been used as promises have caused Christians great consternation. One of them is, "Commit to the Lord whatever you do and your plans will succeed." Christians have started all sorts of business ventures on the basis of this verse. Although it is generally true, it doesn't mean that every business venture that is committed to the Lord is bound to be a success. The second proverb that has caused problems is this: "Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not turn from it." Many parents with children who are not believers have a problem with this verse. They say they train their children in the way they should go, but are disappointed that they seem to have departed from it. Once again, the proverb is not a promise. It is only generally true. Children are not puppets, and we can't force them to go our way. They will reach an age when they will make their own decision, and they are free to do so. Both these proverbs are guidelines, not guarantees. If the users of the proverbs had realized this, much heartache would have been averted. Poetry. The second thing that we need to be aware of is that proverbs are poetic. They are presented in a form that is easy to remember. Let me translate a familiar proverb for you. In advance of committing yourself to a course of action, consider carefully your circumstances and options. Or to rephrase, there are certain corrective measures for minor problems, which when taken early on in a course of action, forestall major problems from arising. Those are both translations of look before you leap, which is easier to remember. We noted in part 1 that Hebrew poetry is a unique form. It is not based on rhyme as most English poetry is, but on rhythm. The rhythm is not only a matter of beat or meter, it is also a rhythm of thought. So Hebrew poetry often consists of pairs of lines, called parallelism, in which one line relates to the other in one of 3 different ways. In synonymous parallelism, the thought in the first line is repeated in the second. For example, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. In antithetical parallelism, the second line contrasts with the first one. He who oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honours God. In synthetic parallelism, the thought in the first line is advanced by the second. Stay away from a foolish man, for you will not find knowledge on his lips. In the examples above, the words and, but, and for give a clue as to which type of parallelism is being used. All the proverbs fit into this kind of pattern, but they are not as easy to remember in English because the rhythm is lost in translation. But Jewish parents passed on the values to their children in this way, and we still do so today. There are other devices that are used in Proverbs. Chapter 31 is arranged as an acrostic, that is, each line begins with a new letter of the Hebrew alphabet. On other occasions the structure is numerical. There are 3 things, and 4 things, or there are 6 things God hates, and so on. These forms enable the reader-hearer to commit the proverb to memory. Patriarchy. The third thing that we need to bear in mind is that this book is patriarchal. It is presented as a father's advice to a youth. It offers no advice at all to women. Such an approach is common throughout the Bible. For example, the letters in the New Testament are not addressed to brothers and sisters, but to brothers. This apparent chauvinism is the result of one of the fundamental assumptions in Scripture. That is, that if the men are right, the women and the children will be right also. The Bible deliberately adds responsibility to lead their families by teaching and wisdom and folly. So in Proverbs we have Solomon, desperate same errors as he did himself. He presents his son and his readers with a choice that they might make about how they will live their lives. Do they want wisdom or folly as their companion for life? He symbolically portrays both these options as women. Wisdom personified. Chapters 8 and 9 describe wisdom as a wonderful woman. The son is advised to love her like a sweetheart, to make her a beloved member of his family, to go after her, to court her. She says, I love those who love me, and those who seek me find me. Wisdom personalized. In chapter 31, the acrostic chapter, a mother advises her son on what to look for in a good woman. She is to be a good wife, mother, neighbour and trader. Such a woman is vital to good, stable family life. She is more precious than rubies. Folly personified. The same pattern is used with folly, which is personified in chapter 9. Folly seduces men with her smooth talk, enticing her prey with tempting offers, but for all who fall for her charms the end is death. She will destroy you, rob you of your manhood. Folly personalized. In chapter 6, Folly is depicted as a prostitute who reduces her victim to a loaf of bread. To her, he is no more than a meal ticket. A biblical theme. This use of women as symbols is not unique to Proverbs. In the book of Revelation there are 2 women, a filthy prostitute and a pure bride. The prostitute is called Babylon and the bride is called Jerusalem. So this theme runs through the whole Bible. Which woman is going to be your companion and your partner, folly or wisdom? The Bible often presents us with choices, and this is the case in Proverbs. Will we choose life or death, light or darkness, heaven or hell? Moral or mental. Furthermore, Proverbs depicts wisdom and folly in another way. It tells us that they are moral choices rather than mental ones. When the world speaks of fools, it means people whose IQs aren't very high. But in the Bible, someone who is very intelligent can be very foolish. Someone can be mentally clever and morally silly. I once heard of a country yokel down in Somerset many years ago who had a strange reputation. If you offered him a 6pence or a £5 note, he always took the 6pence. Thousands of tourists heard about this man and tried the trick on him. The poor foolish man always took the coin, never the note, but really he was no fool. He made a fortune out of it. Folly and wisdom have nothing to do with qualifications. In Psalm 14, the psalmist said, "The fool says in his heart there is no God." The devil told Eve that eating the fruit would lead to wisdom, but in fact it only led to independence from God, the source of all wisdom. Worldly wisdom seeks to find the most profitable option, but biblical wisdom seeks what is best for your character. It is based not on knowledge of the world, but on knowledge of God. This idea is packed up by a verse from chapter 29 that is often misunderstood. Where there is no vision, the people perish. It is used when church leaders want to convince the congregation that their particular scheme should be followed. But in more modern translations, the Hebrew word translated as vision is more correctly translated as revelation, and the word perish as cast off restraint or become a fool. So the verse is actually saying, if God isn't revealing things to you, you will become a fool. So wisdom is practicing God's presence in every area of life. We will need His Spirit's help if we are to understand His mind. The book structure. We turn now to consider the structure of the book of Proverbs. The book has an amazing symmetry. Indeed, the only passage which doesn't really fit is the prologue at the beginning of the Arabic Wisdom in chapter 30. Here is an outline of the book structure. Prologue, chapter 1, verse 1 to 7. Advice to Youth, chapter 1, verse 8 to chapter 9, verse 18. Solomon's Proverbs, chapter 10, verse 1 to chapter 22, verse 16. Wise Words, chapter 22, verse 17 to chapter 23, verse 14. Advice to Youth, chapter 23, verse 15 to chapter 24, verse 22. Wise Words, chapter 24, verse 23 to 34. Solomon's Proverbs, chapter 25, verse 1 to 29, verse 27. And Agur, chapter 30, verse 1 to 33, Advice to Youth, chapter 31, verse 1 to 31. It is arranged like a multi-layered sandwich. So Advice to Youth provides the outer 2 layers. Then the Proverbs of Solomon are the next 2 layers. And then the words of the wise sandwich Advice to Youth in the middle. Having seen the structure of the book, let us fill in some details. Prologue. Why the Proverbs were collected. Advice to Youth, from a father about bad women. Number 1, do. Obey your parents, seek and get wisdom, keep your heart, be faithful to your spouse. Number 2, don't. Get into bad company, commit adultery, take out loans, be lazy, befriend foolish women. Solomon's Proverbs, chapter 10, verse 1 to 22, verse 16, collected by himself. Number 1, contrast godly and wicked lives. Number 2, content godly life. Wise Words, chapter 22, verse 17 to chapter 23, verse 14. Egyptian. Advice to Youth, chapter 23, 15 to 24, 22. More do's, get wise, and don'ts, get drunk. Wise Words, 24, verse 23 to 34. Solomon's Proverbs, 25, verse 1 to 29, 27, copied by Hezekiah. Number 1, relationships with kings, neighbours, enemies, yourself, fools, sluggards, gossips. Number 2, righteousness, chapter 27, 1 to 29, 27. Humility in self, justice for others, fear of the Lord. Advice to Youth, chapter 31, verse 1 to 31. From a mother about a good woman. Number 1, king of a nation. Number 2, queen of a home. 31, verse 10 to 31. The structure and content of the book make a number of things clear. Number 1, this is one of the few Bible books to spell out its purpose clearly. See the prologue. Number 2, these proverbs are especially pertinent for the royal family. There are 10 exhortations addressed to my son. These are applicable especially to Solomon's own son, telling him the sort of company that he should keep and the sort of woman he should marry. Number 3, most of the proverbs in chapter 10 to 15 use antithetic parallelism, whereas chapters 16 to 22 use synonymous parallelism. Number 4, whilst we can discern a structure to the book as a whole, the proverbs themselves are not listed in a topical arrangement. They read like the advice that parents would give to a son leaving home. They are disconnected and disorderly, but they cover the major areas. No parent would prearrange his or her advice into sections with a neat conclusion. So for the purpose of analysis, we will rearrange the proverbs and consider particular themes. The wise man. In Proverbs, a number of synonyms are used to describe wisdom, prudence, sensible, judicious, appropriate, careful, to avoid undesirable consequences. A wise man is contrasted with a fool who is reckless, rash, careless, and wasteful. A wise man is able to discern between good and evil, and he knows how to respond to and deal with a situation. He is discreet and realistic, with power to make plans. He makes the most out of life. The wise are open to correction and reproof, keen to turn away from their own independence and self-reliance towards the light of God's truth. Instead of fearing men, they fear God. The wise man values truth at any price, whether about himself, others, or God. The fool. There are over 70 proverbs about what a fool is like. A fool, always male, is described as ignorant, obstinate, arrogant, perverted, boring, aimless, inexperienced, irresponsible, gullible, careless, complacent, insolent, flippant, sullen, boorish, argumentative. He wants everything on a plate. He doesn't think for himself. He prefers fantasy to fact, illusions to truth. At best he is disturbing, at worst he is dangerous. He is a sorrow to his parents, yet he despises them as old-fashioned. There are two particular fools in this fool's gallery. One is the scoffer, the debunker who is cynical and critical of everybody but himself. The other is the sluggard, the lazy man who is hinged to his bed. He is described as throwing his life down the drain. Words. Another key subject in Proverbs is the tongue. Chapter 6 records 7 abominations to the Lord: snobbery, lies, murder, conspiracy, mischief, perjury, and gossip. The tongue figures in 4 of those. So sins of speech are a major topic throughout the book. For what is in the heart comes out of the mouth. Words are powerful. Words cut deep. They can be cruel, clumsy, and careless. Self-esteem can be ruined by words. They can make it too high or too low. Even bodily health can be affected. Our beliefs and convictions are formed by words. A timely word can have an enormous effect. Words can spread like a prairie fire, causing strife, discord, and division. They may be subtle hints, suggestions, and innuendos, but good words can reach many people as their benefit spreads across communities. Words have their limits. Words are no substitute for deeds. The tongue can't alter facts. Brazen denial and the strongest excuses won't stand. Words can't compel people to respond. Even the best teacher can't change an apathetic pupil, and even the worst gossip won't hurt the innocent. Only the malicious will pay any attention. Healthy speech. There are 4 categories of words that should be on our lips. Honest words, the straightforward yes or no. Few words, the less said the better. Reticence to speak is a virtue. Calm words, words should be spoken from a cool spirit. A hot temper is rarely of benefit. Apt words, a word matched to the occasion, shaped for the benefit of the hearer or reader, can bring great joy. Such speech needs time for reflection first. We need to know what we are talking about and to think through the implications before we speak. Such speech also flows from a person's character, for what a person says comes from what they are. A person's words are worth what he or she is worth. In the New Testament, James says that if anyone does not sin with his tongue, he is a perfect man. Family. Proverbs is full of advice about relationships, both family, relationships and friendships. The family unit is the pivot of society. 3 of the 10 commandments that God gave to Moses relate to the family, including the only commandment with a promise: honour your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Proverbs holds before the reader the following ideals about the family. Husband and wife, parents happily united. Proverbs teaches monogamy, despite the fact that it is written by Solomon. Parents should share their children's training and should speak with one voice. The man is to be loyal, but a woman can make or break her husband, bringing blessing or rottenness to his bones. The book teaches a very high view of marriage and takes a serious view of any sin that would break a marriage up, especially sexual infidelity. A person who strays from the marriage bed loses honour and liberty, throws away their life, courts social disgrace and physical danger. In short, they commit moral suicide. Parents and children. Children faithfully trained. We are told that parents are fools if they don't discipline their children. Spare the rod and spoil the child is one of the better known proverbs. The book also says that discipline is a loving act. There is no suggestion that this is a cure-all for parents. We also learn that foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. They are free to welcome or despise the instruction they are given. Proverbs teaches that children are naturally foolish and need encouragement to be wise. This is diametrically opposed to today's humanistic philosophy that says that the child is basically good and will turn out well if given the right environment. The Bible is so blunt as to say that if you don't punish your children quickly when they are doing wrong, you don't love them. There is teaching on the need to train children in righteousness from an early age, seeking to foster wise habits, so that they think and act in ways that will bring joy and pride and not shame and disgrace. Even the best teaching cannot force obedience, it can only encourage wise choices. Even sons of the best parents may still be too rebellious, lazy, indulgent, or proud to take advice. They can use up a family fortune and neglect a greedy parent in old age. Brothers, including cousins and other relatives. Not many of the Proverbs are directly concerned with the horizontal relationships in the family. The book describes the kind of relationship where the brother is helpful and faithful, and also the kind which brings discord, injury, and bitterness. Friendships. The Hebrew word that is translated friend also means neighbour. It refers to all non-relatives who live within the immediate circle of one's relationships. The advice of the book contrasts with today's depersonalized world, where true friendship is rare. Good neighbours. Good neighbours promote peace and harmony, are reluctant to quarrel and are disarmingly kind. They are generous in their judgments and always willing to give help when needed. They appreciate the importance of silence and privacy. They say no to unwise agreements. Good friends. Proverbs teaches that a few good friends is better than a host of acquaintances. A good friend can be closer than a relative. A good friend has 4 qualities. Loyalty will stick with you no matter what. Honesty will be frank with you and tell you the truth. Consultancy will give you advice. An opposite viewpoint may be what is required. Courtesy will always respect your feelings and refuse to trade on your affection. Conclusion. What should we make of the book of Proverbs? Let us begin by asking whether it achieved its objective. Israel was now in a position of peace and prosperity. Solomon realized that they could lose all this so easily, although he didn't realize that he himself would cause their loss. In chapter 14 we are told that righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. Solomon collected the Proverbs into a book because he knew that without wisdom it would be impossible for Israel to remain in peace and prosperity. But Israel largely ignored the wisdom they received. They moved further away from God. Indeed, even Solomon didn't live by his own wisdom. There is a great deal in the New Testament that builds on the book of Proverbs and focuses on the themes of wisdom. The book is quoted 14 times directly, and there are many other occasions when it is alluded to. In Luke chapter 1, we read that John the Baptist came to turn the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous. Jesus spoke with such wisdom that his hearers asked where he got this wisdom from. Most people are familiar with the wise men who followed a star to Bethlehem. Whilst they have been commonly regarded as Gentiles, it is more likely that they were descendants of the Jews who had been left behind in Babylon after the exile. They had remembered the prophecy of Balaam, that a star would arise out of Israel to be the king of the nations. Numbers 24. So when they saw it, they followed it. Their presence in Matthew's birth narrative says much about the importance of Christ's incarnation. Jesus was said to be filled with wisdom as a child, Luke chapter 2. In his public ministry, he said that the Queen of Sheba came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom. But now one greater than Solomon had come, Luke 11. When Jesus was criticized for eating and drinking, he replied that wisdom is proved right by all her children, Luke 7. Reflecting on the life of Jesus, the Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 1 that Christ is our wisdom. He has become for us wisdom from God. The wisdom of God is seen supremely in the cross. The world says that dying on a cross is sheer folly, but Paul says that what was foolishness to the world was the wisdom of God. Within the New Testament epistles there are many direct quotations from the book of Proverbs. Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, "If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this you will heap burning coals on his head." Peter frequently quotes from Proverbs. For example, in 2 Peter 2 he quotes from Proverbs 26, "As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his folly." Peter's exhortation to his readers to fear the Lord and honour the King comes straight out of Proverbs 24. In Hebrews chapter 12, the writer quotes from Proverbs 3 with respect to God's discipline of his children. "My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines those." 30. Hagar asks the question, "Who has gone up to heaven and come down?" Jesus answers this very question in John 3, when he speaks of his own journey from heaven to earth. But the letter of James is where the Proverbs are especially used. This epistle has been called the New Testament version of Proverbs, since it is so similar in style. It moves swiftly from topic to topic with little sense of order, just like its Old Testament counterpart. Some of the themes in James come from Proverbs, not least a devastating analysis of the evils of the tongue and a description of the benefits of wisdom. Proverbs may seem a strange book to be included in the Bible, but closer inspection shows that its place is thoroughly justified. It deals with some of the major themes of Scripture. It is quoted and alluded to by other parts of the Bible, and is an important part of the Christian's arsenal in his or her fight against foolish living. But it is not an easy book. Care must be taken in reading it, and many of its lessons will find us out.